Sure.
I'm on page 9. It hasn't gone up significantly, but it sounds like the number of students has gone down, so I'm just trying to understand that.
It has. Again, the enrollment fluctuates depending on if it's a tuition student from another town, which we do have a couple of those. We have a student from Norwich and 2 from Old Lyme. We haven't pursued that a lot. We're trying to look at just our own community right now. But in our discussions this year, we'd like to expand to get more tuition students. But for this year, we've had a few students that were not successful over there and came back to the high school, which reduced the numbers from the higher number at the beginning of the year. So as we sit here now, yes, that number's lower. But we usually pick up students around this time of year, towards the end of the year, from the high school who we're finishing up the third quarter right now, and students who have not been successful throughout the year. At the high school, we put things in place to support them through our SRBI program. If that hasn't worked for a variety of reasons, we look for other options. At that point, Coastal Connections could be a good option for them. So towards the end of the academic year is when, at least from the high school, the students transition to Coastal.
So it fluctuates. You're saying the population fluctuates across the academic year. That's what I'm hearing you say.
The beginning and the end are usually the higher numbers.
Okay.
And the middle is usually when there's a transition.
So the numbers depicted, I'm trying to make sense of these numbers in the book. Last year, we've gone up by, it's only 0.75%, but has the overall number of students gone down in that program?
Depending on when you are comparing apples to apples as far as the start of the year to the start of the year.
Well, when I look at these numbers is what I'm...
They are down a little bit, yeah. Yes, they are.
They are down, all right, and are...
For the second year, but for the first year of the program that we did, we're at the same level that we were the first year we started the program.
All right, what's the difference between Coastal Connections and, what do we call it, alternative?
Alternative education.
Yeah.
Great question. Our alternative education program before was designed for students who were not successful at the high school. Largely, the population was based on behavioral concerns. Students who were not successful at the high school and were sent to that program, or it was decided that was a better and smaller environment for them. But the makeup of that student body was really focused more on behavioral concerns. This program is a non-traditional high school, which is separate. It's based on a different philosophy where the students go to school for 3 days a week, and then they do internships 2 days a week. And the internships are linked to their academics. This is built off of Dennis Lickey's work of the Big Picture School in Rhode Island.
So these are not behavioral issues in Coastal Connections?
The mission is slightly different, is different than it was before. Before, students would be, through a process, be sent over to the alternative education school. In the Coastal Connections, they interview to go to this program. Because when the students come to Coastal Connections, they will be going out into the community, and they're representing East Lyme High School through this Coastal Connections program. So we have to make sure that they can manage themselves well and represent the school well. So the traditional students that were in the alternative education program, we would probably not have those students out in a unsupervised internship. Whereas now we set students up in an internship, whether it's at the nursing home, whether it's at the daycares, and then they get their hours there, and then we try and link their academics to what their interest is as far as their internship. Two different models. One is more student interest based, which is the Coastal Connections, and the other alternative education is really a way to try and help support students academically when they're not successful at the high school because of a variety of reasons, but a lot of times it could be based on discipline, whether they've been suspended for a period of time or expelled.
How many kids in alternative ed?
The numbers were about the same, about mid-teens.
And that program, I don't know if I passed that cost in here. I see Coastal Connections has a cost of $311,000. Alternative ed,
Doesn't exist anymore.
We converted the program into Coastal Connections, so there is no alternative ed across the street program anymore.
Well, we
all right,
dissolved
now
that
I'm really
program.
confused.
We dissolved that program.
Yeah.
We had a committee, a district-wide committee, that looked at how successful we were being with that program at that particular time. And the academic community felt that we could do a better job with servicing our student population, where from that committee, the recommendation came to dissolve the alternative education program
Okay.
and look at a more interest-based opportunity that's smaller than the high school, which after they did their research and they went and they visited different programs, the Big Picture School was the program that they wanted to model Coastal Connections after. So the students that feel that the high school is too large for them, they can go to Coastal Connections and they can incorporate more of their interest into internships and wrap their academics around that. We still do have alternative education students at the high school. When we made that transition, we had low numbers in the low single digits at that time. To be honest with you, we are recognizing that there still is a need for that. We have a few other programs in place at the high school that are supporting students better, so they don't get to that point where they were before and in years past when we moved them to alternative education. We have our SRBI program, which is scientific research-based intervention. It's really made to help support students academically, so as they're struggling, instead of them continue to struggle and then get to a point where they just give up and then become behavioral issues and then end up in alt ed, we're now putting supports around them to help them before they get to that frustration point. So we have less kids than we did before, but there still is a population that school is just not their thing. And in a large high school like East Lyme, they are struggling and they begin to act out because they're not successful. That's not where they want to be. So we're in the process of, actually, Mr. Reese and I just met with a group of teachers at the high school to talk about ways to service these students as well.
So there's no line item budget in here for alternative ed?
At this point, there is not.
So if you have a, excuse me, if you have a disciplinary problem, then does it fall under homebound or it's tutors if they're?
That's correct. If we have a scenario where a student gets suspended or expelled, we're required to give them 10 hours of tutoring per week, which is outside of the school. Sometimes we've been able to be creative and try and come up with a different program to service them, but it would be outside of the school because they have been removed from the school community.
I think the other piece too that they've really done a great job at the high school of really turning their in-school suspension program into, as opposed to kind of what might have been historically, not here, but historically might be seen as kind of school jail, into really something that supports students, that gets them back on track with their academics, and encourages them to get back into the school setting. So I think that's another area that really helps students as opposed to consequences.
Thank you.
Done a nice job.
I just had a few
Thank you.
questions.
Go ahead.
The Coastal Connections, I really like the concept because it's a way to actually, what we call wraparound services around the students so they don't slip into the at-risk. They're kind of like they could, but for the support, it actually can keep the child focused and also connect them with real-life experience, and I think it's a very positive program. I like the fact that the alternative education or the place across the street isn't being utilized that much, but I also think that's like a change in the law, more of an in-house kind of in-school suspension, so children didn't lose that continuity, but I think Coastal Connections really, I really support the program. But because I'm on the Board of Finance, I have to ask the question. Now, you had 2 students from Old Lyme, so they paid revenue, right? Tuition. So it's in that tuition line where it says other revenue to the town, I'm assuming in the tuition line. Right, Don? Right. Okay, that's it.
Okay, I do have one more question, and that has to do with the Visiting Nurse Association. I go through the numbers. We have 5 school nurses. We pay the Visiting Nurse Association $564,262 for those 5 nurses. First part of that question is, does the VNA pick up all the benefits, or do we pick up some of them?
VNA pays and supervises the nurses.
Okay. And this $564,000 or $117,000 per school nurse, or for the program, is that for a 180-day work year, or do they have some summer duties or vacation duties?
So there are actually,
I looked at your numbers in your big book. It says 5.
I think there's actually a nurse's aide as well.
A
And
what?
There's also a nurse's assistant in that figure.
We moved the medically fragile program from, as a way special ed saved some money a couple of years ago. We moved the medically fragile program into our middle school, and we took one of the RNs and moved into that program. I hired a aide which works upstairs. They work just primarily just during the school year.
Just during the school year?
Yeah, unless during the summer, it would be a special education thing, right? We would have one
Right.
that would be paid through a special education program for summer school. But the bulk of them are during that period.
And the board feels that we're getting a bang for the buck for $564,000 for a 180-day school year.
So
We reviewed this a couple of years ago, and we went out to see what the cost of nurses were and the availability of them. And we found that this was the best answer to what we need.
Is that your contract with the VNA?
It's an annual contract.
Yeah, that includes the benefits.
Yes.
So when you're paying that amount, you're not only paying the salary, but part of the contract you'd be contributing to their benefits.
And we
So
pay an hourly rate for them, for the nurses.
Didn't I just hear you say that benefits and salary was paid by VNA?
yeah,
Yes.
well, it's all included in that
in
rate.
the hourly rate.
So
So,
we're paying
and-
their benefits.
So you're paying it, yeah. Yeah,
By virtue
it's
of
by contract.
So,
Right.
and in the 565,000, there are 6 nurses.
There's-
2 at the middle school, 1 at the medically fragile special education program, and 1 in each school. And there's a nurse's aide in the middle school, right? So it's 6 nurses and a nurse's aide. I hate to contradict the book, but just to be
Well, I
accurate.
was just using your book, and it's in your book 5.
Hate to contradict the book. but
I mean, there's a page that goes through the numbers of everybody, math teachers, history teachers, et cetera, and under nurses, it says 5.
We will update that. And I would
Okay.
add that the medically fragile nurse, a good percentage of that actually comes back to us in our excess cost grant through the special education funding grant. which
Okay,
is
any
also
other
in-
questions from the board?
I have one more. I ask this every year about this time of year. We're about 3/4 of the way through your budget. Are you projecting any surplus to give back to us? I know we got 15,000 last year.
We are tighter this year than we were last year. And I think we believe we have a strong case to finish, finish in the black. I'm nervous that Don has an answer for that because
Well,
I
don't
think
hold them up. I want to.
We've had a rough winter, both with storms and with the fact that it's still in the 20s this morning. But Don?
I
I concur because I beat up on him on a regular basis. Special ed is one of the places we worry, but this is the tightest year we've ever had. And just as I saw Paul transferring funds to cover his costs for the snowstorms, we're in the same boat right now.
Mhm.
I'm kind of nervous here when I see what March's results are, because a lot of the overtime and costs are kicking in right now. In fact, we just yesterday I had to buy some more for Niantic. I was hoping the weather would be better. But it's really, really tight. And the budget, I know you want to hear this, the budget was tight to start with. And I think you saw previously, we had about $97,000 worth of extra expenses, breaking elevators and things like that that have happened to us along the line.
Any other questions from the board?
Enrollment is projected to go down, is that correct? By 25 students?
And it's 25 students spread throughout the whole district.
And historically, that number is always high at this time in terms of the amount of drop.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't be surprised to see enrollment basically flat for the coming year, which is first time in six years, I think, something like that. So,
That, if it's flat, you mean?
yeah, that is flat. Yeah, but it doesn't. It hasn't gone down.
Any other questions from the board? Hearing none, public oh, I'm sorry.
I've been waiting for my turn.
Go ahead.
And I just want to bring this up to more of a macro level. I would really like to support this budget in its entirety. And I think that it would be easier for me to do that if I had metrics that I could cite in terms of performance improvements. So I'm wondering, in all of this budget and all of this Board of Education data that we have, I don't really see anything in terms of measuring performance. Whether it's, I guess, number 12 within the state, and this is East Lyme High School was rated by Business Week as number 12 in the state. U.S. News and World Reports rates East Lyme High School as 524th out of 21,000. So is there anything in the schools or the Board of Education that has, is there a determination to raise those numbers, or is there a concerted effort to get better? If our school system is enhanced and the people realize that and more people want to move here and it increases our real estate values, that's going to bring more money in, but we need an attractor for that to happen. So is there anything in place, I guess is my question.
So I would start by saying every year the Board of Education is very supportive and sets very high expectations for us. And I'd let Dr. Hagan speak to that if you chose to. So there's somebody certainly watching us, and we're certainly trying to improve all the time. One of the things we have not asked for additional funds for is integrating the Common Core standards into our system, and that is something that is on every teacher's plate and every administrator's plate as well, that they are working to basically put the standards. Many look at the standards and what was expected before in second grade or first or second grade is now being asked of in kindergarten. And really, in many places, there's a shifting around of where the responsibilities of what curriculum areas and where they fall in terms of grades. But overall, there's an overall increase. And we, for the past 3 years, have been really studying how to do that and having our teachers improve. We've, every fall can show places where we've certainly improved. There's both in our state testing and with the formative assessments we take. So we certainly have those metrics to put them into. We could certainly try to get you some more information about how we're doing. I would just say, a final plea for the administrative support. We really have to do the evaluation piece. We didn't ask for it. We are committed to making it a positive thing for our kids. We are very, very concerned because there's two realities if we don't do it. And one reality is that we, say to the state, well, we'll meet you as best we can, and that doesn't sit well and with anybody. I mean, we're certainly people who follow the rules, and we do what we're told, and so we certainly don't want to be in that position. The second reality is that our administrative staff gets really just swallowed up by the evaluation system. And the impact of that means potentially, where what we've seen in other districts who've tried similar pieces, is a lot less contact with parents and the community, which is an important part of what administrators do. It's what really makes things go well, having connections, but it's also having less connections with kids themselves. And if you, Mr. Susi was very articulate earlier about, a lot of what we do and whether kids are successful and go on to do well is based and are safe in their lives. Is a lot of that's focused on the connections they have in their schools, and we're very concerned about what will happen if we say, you know what, just take and just do evaluations. Don't spend any time, with that parent, and don't spend time with those students, because I think there will be negative. We would not do that to the point where it's negative, but it's where we're being forced to go. So that's my plea, since you asked me another question.
Okay. Can I ask Dr. Hagan just to speak to any performance metrics for a few minutes?
Yeah, sure. More of just maybe looking backwards for just a second. When Dr. Lombardo came on board about 5 years ago, he initiated with the entire administrative staff putting together a 5-year strategic plan for the district. And in that, Coastal Connections was one of those elements. Also, improvements in bringing our kids back that have special needs for special education, so that they're not sitting on buses being carted all over the state. That was a huge step forward. And then last year, with the help from the Board of Finance and everyone, we were able, through some cost cutting and some efficiencies and so forth, instill all-day kindergarten. And that probably is one of the biggest steps going forward in improving the quality of the education across the district. So that, in terms of where we're at the 5th year. We're entering the 5th year of the strategic plan. The most important task that the Board of Education has in this coming year is to conduct a search for the new superintendent. And with that, that will bring in a new superintendent who will then initiate the next phase of the next strategic plan and moving forward. And so, just as with Dr. Lombardo's tenure here for the last 5 years, I'm sure that the importance of driving the quality of the education, maintaining the high standards we have, will be right at the forefront, as well as doing it in as efficient way that we possibly can for the benefit of the community as well. So,
as you're searching for a new superintendent, I would request perhaps that maybe part of this strategic plan would include elevating East Lyme High School maybe into the top 10 in the state as a goal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Again, because I think that would help your cause in terms of getting what you need to perform at a higher level, if that's what you wish to do.
Yep. Yeah. One of the things we are going to do, we will be embarking on community forums with community members, parents, teachers, administrative staff, in gathering information this spring for the attributes and the qualities that we want to see in the new superintendent and the emphasis that we want to see in the new superintendent. So as when we start the interviewing process next fall, we'll have everyone's input, and so that we'll put that right on the list.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Any other questions from the board? Hearing none, we'll move on to public discussion. Anybody from the public like to address the board? Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
I'm Barbara Senges Murphy. I live in town. I'm a new member of the Board of Education. I replaced Chris Sanford. And I just want to let the Board of Finance know that the deliberations for the Board of Education on the budget were extremely thorough, that it really is a bare bones budget. There was money in the original budget for elementary world language, which we took out for another year. We speak to doing things to raise the level of education in East Lyme. That was something that we were hoping to do and we couldn't. So I do want to say that the board realizes that finances are tight, so you balance trying to keep the quality what it is and to raise it higher, but unfortunately that costs money, and fixed costs go up all the time, so it is a struggle. The board realized it. I think the superintendent and the staff did a really good job trying to keep the numbers down. And so I guess as a member of the Board of Ed, but more as a citizen of East Lyme, I would ask you to do your best to support this budget. I've lived in town a long time. I've worked in Connecticut education for 40 years, and I know people from lots of areas in Connecticut and all of the surrounding towns. Everyone wants to live in East Lyme. And the reason they want to live in East Lyme is because they want their children to go to the East Lyme schools. East Lyme schools are as good, if not better, than the highest rated schools in the state. It's been my job to look at scores for 30 years, and East Lyme is off the charts and has always been off the charts.
In terms of what?
In terms of state scores, AP tests, you name it, we excel at it. We do as well as all those districts on the Gold Coast, and we're not as high rated as they are because we don't have as much money as they do, but we do as well as they do. And I know personally, I cannot tell you how many young parents and families ask me, are there any houses in your neighborhood? Our kids are getting to school age now. We want to go out of, and I won't name our neighbors, but neighboring towns where they live, where they're happy living and they like their houses, but they want the kids to come to the East Lyme schools. You know, any town, if we're going to grow, we need the young families. We have to be concerned about our retired citizens. I happen to be one of them. And we're on fixed incomes, and it becomes difficult. But the growth of the town is those of us who have houses